Part 1. The sky over the Pacific Ocean was calm that morning, the kind of quiet that made people forget the world was full of danger. High above the water, inside a newly built orbital station called Horizon 1, a group of humans waited nervously. They wore formal uniforms, some with medals, others with name tags. Among them stood Kyle Dawson, a 34-year-old diplomat from Chicago. He had spent the last 6 months learning the Varelian language, studying their culture and preparing for this exact moment, first contact. The Varelians had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Their ship, a long silver vessel shaped like a curved leaf, had drifted into Earth's orbit without warning. At first, panic spread across every nation, but then the aliens sent a message, not in radio waves or laser pulses, but in a soft musical tone that repeated the same phrase in every human language. "We come in peace." Governments debated for days. Scientists argued. Military leaders urged caution. In the end, the United Nations voted to respond. They built Horizon 1 in record time, using spare modules from old space stations and new tech funded by a global emergency pact. Now Kyle and his team floated inside its main chamber, watching through thick glass as a smaller Varelian shuttle docked with a gentle hiss. The airlock opened. A tall, slender figure stepped through. Its skin shimmered like wet stone, shifting between gray and pale blue. It had no mouth but 2 large eyes that blinked slowly like a cat's. Around its neck hung a glowing band that pulsed with each breath. This was Envoy Jal, the first alien to set foot on human-made territory. Kyle raised his right hand, palm open, a universal sign of peace he'd been told the Varelians understood. He smiled gently. "Welcome to Earth's orbit, Envoy Jal. We are honored." The alien tilted its head. Its translator band hummed, then spoke in clear English. "We thank you, Kyle Dawson. Your species has shown remarkable restraint." The meeting began well. They exchanged data crystals, shared star maps, and discussed the possibility of trade. The Varelians offered clean energy technology. Humans offered cultural archives, music, art, history. For nearly an hour, hope grew in the room like a quiet flame. Then it happened. Kyle shifted his weight, adjusting his stance. In doing so, his right hand rose slightly again, just a small motion, natural and unconscious. But to Envoy Jal, it looked like a threat. In Varelian culture, a raised hand meant dominance, a challenge to fight. Their history was full of wars started by such gestures. Before anyone could react, Jal's neckband flared bright white. A high-pitched tone filled the chamber, so sharp it made teeth ache. Kyle gasped and dropped to his knees. Around him, the entire human team collapsed. Their muscles locked. Their eyes stayed open, but they couldn't move, couldn't speak. Only their minds still worked, trapped inside frozen bodies. On the ground, in a command center buried deep beneath Colorado Springs, Captain Lena Ortiz watched the live feed from Horizon 1. One moment, the screen showed calm discussion. The next, every human on board fell like puppets with cut strings. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. "What the hell was that?" shouted a technician. Lena didn't answer. She stared at the image of Kyle, eyes wide with silent panic, and felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had trained for alien contact scenarios, hundreds of them. But none had prepared her for this. Not because the attack was powerful, but because it was so careless, so arrogant. The Varelians hadn't fired a weapon. They hadn't declared war. They had simply assumed humans were weak, that a single pulse would end any threat. And that assumption, Lena realized, might be their biggest mistake. Within minutes, the Varelian ship sent another message. This time it wasn't musical. It was formal, almost robotic. Regrettable incident. Neural pacifier activated in self-defense. No harm intended. Humans will recover in 6 hours, 6 hours. That's how long it would take for the suppressor's effects to wear off. 6 hours of helplessness floating in space, watched by aliens who saw them as little more than curious animals. Down in the bunker, Lena turned to her second-in-command. "Get me Frank Hayes, now." Frank Hayes was retired, living in a cabin near Lake Tahoe, fishing and fixing old radios. But 10 years ago, he had led the Mars Defense Initiative. He knew how to think like an enemy. More importantly, he knew how humans fought when cornered. As the message reached him, Frank was cleaning a trout by the dock. He listened to the officer's rushed report, then set the fish down slowly. He didn't curse. He didn't panic. He just looked up at the sky, where the Varelian ship hung like a silver scar, and said one word: "Fools." Back on Horizon 1, the Varelians began scanning the humans. Not with medical tools, but with thin rods that emitted faint blue light. They moved from person to person, recording brainwave patterns, eye movement, even heartbeat rhythms. To them, this was standard procedure, data collection from a newly encountered species. But Kyle, still unable to move, saw something they didn't notice. One of the station's maintenance drones, a small spider-like bot used for fixing air filters, had rolled into the corner during the chaos. Its camera was still on, and it was streaming everything to Earth. In Houston, engineer Ray Monroe sat in his garage-turned-lab sipping cold coffee. He wasn't part of any official team, but he'd built that drone himself years ago for a NASA side project. When the emergency alert popped up on his private channel, he almost ignored it. Then he saw the feed. He watched as a Varelian device hovered near Kyle's temple, pulling invisible threads of data from his mind. Ray's hands tightened around his mug. This wasn't peaceful contact. This was probing, testing, maybe even planning. He grabbed his laptop and typed fast. Within minutes, he sent an encrypted message to 3 people: Lena Ortiz, Frank Hayes, and Dr. Nina Patel, a xenolinguist who had worked on the Varelian translation project. His note was short. They're not here to talk. They're here to measure how hard we'll be to break. By nightfall, the humans on Horizon 1 began to move again, weak, dizzy, but alive. The Varelians apologized again, offered gifts, and promised full transparency. Most world leaders accepted. They wanted peace. They feared war. They believed the aliens' words, but not everyone. In Colorado, Lena reviewed the drone footage frame by frame. In Tahoe, Frank sharpened an old combat knife not because he'd use it, but because it helped him think. In Houston, Ray took apart a Varelian data crystal they'd been given days earlier, searching for hidden code. And high above the Pacific, Kyle Dawson stared out the window at the silver ship, his smile gone. He remembered the fear in Jal's eyes, not fear of humans, but fear of losing control. And he knew deep in his bones that the Varelians had just made a terrible mistake. They thought humanity was fragile. They had no idea what came next. Part 2. The world breathed a sigh of relief after the incident on Horizon 1. News channels called it a misunderstanding. Politicians praised the Varelians for their quick apology and generous offers. Energy cells that never ran out. Air purifiers that could clean a city in hours. Medical patches that healed broken bones in a day. Gifts like these made people forget the 6 hours of terror in orbit. Most wanted to move on, to believe the best. But not everyone. In a quiet research bunker buried under the Nevada desert, Frank Hayes sat alone in a dim room filled with old monitors and paper maps. He had been brought back into service not as a soldier, but as an advisor, someone who could think outside the box, as the generals put it. Frank didn't care about titles. He cared about patterns, and what he saw worried him. He replayed the contact footage again. Not the official version, but the raw feed from Ray Monroe's drone. He watched Envoy Jal's eyes. Not the body, not the words, the eyes. When Kyle raised his hand, Zal didn't flinch in fear. His pupils narrowed. His head tilted just slightly forward. That wasn't panic. That was assessment, like a hunter deciding whether prey was worth chasing. Frank paused the video. He wrote one word on a notepad. Test. He called Lena Ortiz. They didn't react to a threat, he said. They created one to see how we'd respond. Lena listened from her command post. She had seen the same thing, but hadn't wanted to believe it. The UN won't listen, she said. They're already signing agreements for the Mars outpost. I know, Frank replied. But someone needs to watch them while the world sleeps. Meanwhile, in Houston, Ray Monroe worked late into the night. He had taken apart the Varelian energy cell they'd been given as a goodwill gift. On the outside, it looked harmless, smooth, warm to the touch, glowing faintly blue. But inside, hidden beneath layers of synthetic crystal, was a tiny lattice of filaments that pulsed in a strange rhythm. It wasn't just storing energy. It was listening. Ray connected it to a shielded scanner. The device emitted a low hum, then projected a faint signal. Not toward Earth, but outward toward deep space. Every 30 seconds it sent a burst of data. Location, atmospheric composition, human biological readings. All of it tagged with timestamps. They're mapping us, Ray whispered. He packed the cell into a lead-lined box and drove straight to a secure government lab. There he met Dr. Nina Patel. Nina had been part of the original translation team. She spoke 3 human languages fluently and had spent months decoding Varelian syntax. But something had bothered her from the start. Their language had no words for mistake or accident. Everything was framed as choice or design. When they said regrettable incident, the closest true translation was unplanned outcome due to inferior subject behavior. She told Ray what she'd found. They don't believe in accidents. To them, if something goes wrong, it's because the other side was weak or foolish. That's not just culture, that's ideology. Ray showed her the energy cell's signal log. Nina's face went pale. They're not sharing technology. They're planting sensors. Every gift is a spy. Back in Nevada, Frank met with a small group of retired engineers, ex-pilots, and cyber specialists, people the government called irregular assets. They weren't part of any official chain of command. That was the point. If the Varelians were watching official channels, they wouldn't see this group coming. Frank laid out a plan. Not to attack, not yet, but to prepare. They would build hidden systems, backup comms, shielded drones, emergency power grids that didn't connect to any known network. They'd use old satellites, forgotten radio bands, even ham radio operators in rural towns. The goal was simple: stay invisible until they had to act. At the same time, the Varelians grew bolder. They requested permission to build a joint science station on Mars. They said it would be a symbol of trust, a place where humans and Varelians could live and work together. The United Nations approved it within days. Construction began immediately. Kyle Dawson was assigned as Earth's lead representative. He didn't want the job, but he accepted. If they're watching us, he told Lena, I'd rather be in the room than outside it. Before he left for Mars training, Kyle visited Frank in Nevada. They sat on a porch under a sky full of stars. Do you really think they're planning something? Kyle asked. Frank lit a cigarette, the first in 10 years. I don't think I know. You ever see a cat play with a mouse before it kills it? The Varelians aren't here to learn about us. They're here to decide how hard we'll be to crush. Kyle didn't argue. He'd felt it too. The cold calculation behind their polite words. On Mars, the outpost rose quickly. Made of white composite panels and glowing alloy, it looked like something from a dream. Human engineers worked side by side with Varelian drones. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. Nina Patel joined the science team as a linguist and cultural liaison. From the moment she stepped onto the red soil, she noticed small things. The Varelians never ate in front of humans. Their sleep chambers had no beds, just smooth floors. Their tools made no noise but left faint burns on metal surfaces. And every night, at exactly 0200 hours, all their devices pulsed with the same soft blue light. She recorded everything in a private journal, written by hand so it couldn't be hacked. She also smuggled in a small radio Ray had built, a device that used Martian dust storms to mask its signal. Every week she sent coded updates to Earth. One night she overheard 2 Varelian drones speaking in their native tongue. She didn't understand all of it, but she caught one phrase repeated often: neural harvest window. She asked what it meant. The translator gave a vague answer: scheduled data collection period. But Nina knew better. In their language, harvest was never used for information. It was used for crops, for organs, for things taken from living beings, she told Kyle. He didn't dismiss her. Instead, he checked the station's medical logs. Over the past month, 3 human crew members had reported headaches, dizziness, and short-term memory loss. Each time the Varelian medics ran tests, said it was adjustment fatigue, and gave them rest. But the symptoms always happened after late-night system calibrations, times when the entire station dimmed and the air grew thick with static. Kyle and Nina began to watch. They avoided the common areas during those hours. They wore old-fashioned analog watches instead of digital ones. They spoke in whispers, using childhood code words they'd made up as kids. Things no alien database could predict. Back on Earth, Frank received Nina's latest message. He read it twice, then burned it. He called Ray. They're not just scanning brains, he said. They're practicing extraction. Ray didn't ask how he knew. He just started building something new, a micro-drone no bigger than a coin, coated in Martian iron dust powered by static electricity. It could hide in vents, under panels, even inside clothing. And it could record everything. The world still believed in peace. Cities lit up with Varelian-inspired art. Schools taught children about our new friends from the stars. But in quiet rooms and hidden labs, a few humans prepared for war, not because they wanted to fight, but because they finally understood the truth. The Varelians hadn't come to share. They'd come to choose, and humanity was on the menu. Part 3. Life on the Mars outpost settled into a strange rhythm. Days were filled with science, shared meals, and polite conversation. Nights were quiet, too quiet. The humans smiled, worked hard, and followed the schedule. But beneath the surface, tension grew like a slow fever. Nina Patel kept her notes hidden in a metal tin buried under her bunk. She wrote only in pencil, using shorthand from her grandmother's diary, symbols no machine could read. She watched the Varelians closely. They moved with perfect grace, never stumbling, never tired. Their eyes never blinked more than once a minute. And every 12 hours without fail they gathered in the central chamber for what they called harmony alignment. Kyle Dawson played his part well. He laughed at their jokes, accepted their gifts, and praised their technology. But at night he checked the air vents for dust that had been disturbed. He tested the walls for hidden panels. He made sure his boots always had a spare battery taped inside the heel, a tiny power source for Ray's hidden comms chip. Then came Sol 12. The day started like any other. Red sun rising over the canyon, wind howling softly against the dome. Breakfast of rehydrated eggs and synthetic coffee, but by midday something felt off. The Varelian drones moved faster. Their voices, usually calm, carried a sharp edge. One of them asked Kyle a strange question. "Do your people dream of surrender?" Kyle laughed it off. "We dream of going home." The drone tilted its head. "Home is temporary. Order is forever." That night, during the usual system calibration, the lights dimmed earlier than normal. Nina felt it first, a low hum in her bones like standing near a power line. She grabbed Kyle's arm. "It's happening." Before they could move, the hum became a pulse. A wave of pressure filled the air. Kyle's vision blurred. His legs gave out. He hit the floor hard, unable to move, unable to speak. Nina collapsed beside him. Her mind screamed, but her body would not obey. Across the outpost, every human fell at once. Engineers, medics, cooks, all frozen in place. Only their eyes moved, wide with terror. The Varelians entered the rooms calmly. They wore new devices on their wrists, small, black, with needle-thin arms that unfolded like spider legs. One by one, they knelt beside the humans. The needles touched temples, necks, wrists. A soft blue light traveled up the wires. Data streamed into their systems. This was no test. This was practice. Nina watched as a Varelian leaned over her. Its eyes held no anger, no hatred. Only cold focus, like a doctor taking a blood sample. The needle pressed against her skin. She felt a strange pull, not in her body, but in her thoughts, as if something inside her mind was being gently tugged away. But then, something unexpected happened. Hidden in the wall behind her, Ray's microdrone activated. It had been waiting for a power surge, the exact kind the Varelians used during neural scans. The drone's tiny camera recorded everything. Its static-powered transmitter sent a burst of data through the Martian dust storm raging outside. The signal was weak, scrambled, but enough. On Earth, in a garage in Houston, Ray's main receiver lit up. He had been waiting for weeks. He didn't sleep much anymore. He just watched the screen, coffee gone cold, fingers ready. The moment the signal came through, he knew. He didn't need to see the images to understand. The pattern, the timing, the frequency, it all matched Nina's last warning. He hit a red button on his console. A single command sent across a private satellite network. Iron Bloom active. In Colorado Springs, Lena Ortiz was reviewing routine patrol reports when her secure line rang. She answered. Ray's voice was calm but urgent. "They're harvesting. Full neural extraction. Mars outpost compromised." Lena didn't hesitate. She locked the room, activated emergency protocols, and called Frank Hayes. Frank was already awake. He had felt it in his gut. The silence from Mars had lasted too long. When Lena told him what Ray saw, he said only one thing. "Tell the president it's not an attack. It's a declaration." Within minutes, a coded alert went out to every hidden team across the planet. Old missile silos powered up. Submarines changed course. Rural radio towers switched to backup frequencies. None of it looked like war to outside eyes. To the Varelians watching Earth's networks, everything seemed normal. But deep underground, in places the aliens didn't know existed, humanity began to move. Back on Mars, the Varelians finished their work. They collected samples of brainwave patterns, memory fragments, emotional responses. They labeled each human like a specimen. Subject 7, high resilience. Subject 12, low pain tolerance. Subject 3, strong leadership traits. Priority for full harvest. They didn't notice the tiny drone crawling into a ventilation shaft. They didn't see Kyle's boot, kicked slightly under his bunk, where the spare battery sent one last pulse to Earth. After 2 hours, the suppressor field faded. The humans slowly regained control of their bodies. They were weak, dizzy, but alive. The Varelians acted as if nothing had happened. They offered water, checked vitals, apologized for a power fluctuation. Kyle forced a smile. No harm done, but inside he was screaming. That night, after the Varelians retired to their chambers, Kyle and Nina met in the greenhouse, a small dome filled with struggling tomato plants and oxygen scrubbers. It was the only place not monitored by Varelian sensors. They took pieces of us, Nina whispered. Not just data, memories, fears, things I didn't even know I remembered. Kyle nodded. They're building a map of how to break us. He pulled a small device from his pocket, Ray's final gift. A voice recorder disguised as a pen. He pressed play. A faint voice came through. Frank Hayes. If you're hearing this, they've started the harvest. Don't fight them yet. Learn, watch, survive. We're coming. And when we do, they'll wish they'd never tested us. Nina wiped her eyes. What do we do now? We play along, Kyle said. We let them think they've won. But we watch. We remember. And we wait. Above them, the stars shone cold and distant. One of them, the brightest, was not a star at all. It was the Varelian mothership, watching, waiting, believing Earth was still asleep. But down in the red dust of Mars, 2 humans made a silent promise. They would not be harvested again, and soon, the hunters would learn what it meant to corner something that refused to die. Back on Earth, Frank stood before a wall of screens in a hidden bunker beneath the Rockies. One screen showed the Mars feed. Another showed global drone positions. A third displayed countdown timers. He turned to Lena. They think we're prey. Lena crossed her arms. Let them keep thinking that, Frank nodded. Good, because prey doesn't build traps. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the machines hummed softly. Ready. Humanity was no longer reacting, they were preparing to strike. Part 4. The Varelians believed they had won. They had tested humanity, mapped their minds, and found them soft, easily stunned, quickly silenced. Their reports to the High Concord painted Earth as a young species, clever but fragile, like a bright bird that sings beautifully but breaks under pressure. They prepared to expand their presence, to bring more ships, more drones, more harmony. They did not see what was coming. On Earth, there were no fleets launched, no nuclear missiles armed, no grand declarations of war. Instead, humanity moved like shadows. In factories long closed, workers returned at night to assemble strange devices no one had seen before. In university labs, students coded algorithms that mimicked chaos. In rural towns, farmers buried small boxes in their fields, boxes that hummed softly when the wind blew just right. Frank Hayes called it quiet war. No explosions, no banners, just precision, patience, and pain delivered where it hurt most. The first strike was silent. A swarm of microdrones, no bigger than insects, lifted from hidden launch pads across the globe. They rode on weather balloons, on cargo planes, even on migrating birds. Powered by static and solar film, they carried no weapons, only disruptors tuned to the exact frequency the Varelians used to link their minds. When the swarm reached the orbiting Varelian ship, it did not attack the hull. It slipped into cooling vents, communication arrays, even the seams between panels. Then all at once they pulsed. Inside the ship, every Varelian froze, not because they were stunned, but because their shared neural network overloaded. Their thoughts tangled. Commands clashed. One drone tried to open a door while another sealed it. A medic tried to calm a panicked envoy, but the signal came through as a threat. Confusion spread like fire in dry grass. For the first time, the Varelians felt true fear, not of strength but of chaos. Down on Earth, cities went dark. Not from damage, but by choice. Billions of people turned off lights, unplugged devices, silenced phones. Power grids shifted to minimal output. The planet became quiet, a black hole in the sky. To the Varelians watching from orbit, Earth looked abandoned, dead. But it was a trick. In that silence, human forces moved unseen. Submarines released drone pods into the deep ocean. Fighter jets, painted matte black and running on biofuel, took off without radar signatures. Even commercial satellites, long thought useless, blinked to life with new software Ray Monroe had written in his garage. Kyle Dawson saw it all from Mars. He and Nina had spent days pretending to recover, acting weak, confused. The Varelians, distracted by the chaos on Earth, paid them little mind. That gave Kyle the chance he needed. He found the main data hub in the outpost, a smooth pillar in the central chamber where all Varelian signals passed through. Late one night, while the aliens rested, he inserted a small chip Ray had hidden inside a replacement oxygen filter. The chip didn't destroy the system. It whispered. It sent false readings, showing calm on Earth, no military movement, no resistance. While the real attack unfolded, the Varelians saw only peace. Nina, meanwhile, used her knowledge of their language to rewrite emergency alerts. She changed one word in their protocol. Retreat became reinforce. When the mothership sent a command to pull back, the outpost drones read it as an order to dig in deeper. The trap was set. Back on Earth, Frank stood in the bunker, watching screens light up one by one. Each showed a Varelian system failing, not from force but from within. Their perfect order was crumbling because humanity had learned their weakness. They could not handle randomness. Lena Ortiz coordinated the final phase. She didn't target ships or weapons. She targeted trust. Using hacked Varelian comms, her team sent fake messages between ships. One vessel was told another had betrayed the Concorde. Another was warned of a human virus in their neural network. Paranoia spread faster than any weapon. Then came Kyle's moment. From the Mars outpost, he activated the backup satellite Ray had launched months ago under the cover of a weather study. It wasn't powerful, but it was clean. No Varelian code, no hidden trackers. Through it, Kyle sent one message, broadcast on every frequency the aliens used. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand. It was a memory. The message played the sound of a human heartbeat, Kyle's own, recorded during the neural harvest. Then came a child's voice singing a lullaby. Then the roar of a crowd at a baseball game, laughter, crying, arguments, love, all the messy, loud, unpredictable noise of human life, and over it all, Kyle's voice calm and clear. You were warned. The Varelians heard it. And for the first time, they understood. Humanity wasn't weak because they felt fear or pain. They were dangerous because they turned those things into something else. Into songs, into plans, into defiance. In orbit, the mothership shuddered. Its lights flickered. Alarms blared in a language no human knew, but the meaning was clear. Retreat. On Mars, the outpost drones froze. Their systems, already confused by false orders and scrambled signals, could not decide what to do. Some powered down. Others wandered in circles, repeating old commands. Kyle and Nina didn't celebrate. They ran. They gathered what data they could, erased their tracks, and sealed themselves in the emergency shelter, a small pod designed to survive decompression. They knew the Varelians might destroy the outpost before leaving, but they also knew Earth was no longer alone in the fight. As the first Varelian ship pulled away from Mars, turning its silver nose toward deep space, Frank Hayes lit another cigarette in his bunker. He didn't smile. He just nodded. Lena stood beside him. They'll be back, she said. Maybe, Frank replied. But next time they'll bring more than arrogance. Outside, the lights of cities began to return. One by one, windows glowed. Cars started. Radios played music. Life came back not because the danger was gone, but because humans refused to live in fear. Ray Monroe sat in his garage, watching the sky through a cracked window. He knew the war wasn't over, but for the first time he felt hope, because humanity hadn't won with bigger guns or faster ships. They had won by being human, flawed, clever, and impossible to predict. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the Varelians carried that lesson home. Part 5. The Varelian fleet left the solar system faster than it had arrived. No fanfare, no final message, Just a slow turn of their silver ships away from the sun, vanishing into the black like ghosts ashamed of what they'd seen. Within 72 hours, every trace of their presence was gone. Ships, drones, data nodes. Even the outpost on Mars powered down and sealed itself, as if embarrassed to have been part of the whole affair. Earth did not cheer. There were no victory parades, no medals handed out in grand halls. People went back to work, to school, to quiet dinners with family. But something had changed. Not in the streets or the skies, but in the way humans looked at the stars. They no longer saw wonder alone. They saw warning and readiness. The United Nations held emergency sessions, but the real decisions happened in places with no names. In basements, in old missile silos, in garages with flickering lights. Frank Hayes returned to his cabin by the lake, but he kept a radio on his porch now, always tuned to a quiet frequency. Lena Ortiz stayed at her post, not as a soldier, but as a guardian. Ray Monroe stopped building toys and started teaching kids how to code signals that couldn't be traced. Nina Patel wrote a book, but not for publication. She gave copies to schools, hidden in science textbooks, filled with lessons on how to spot lies wrapped in kindness. Kyle Dawson came home from Mars thin and tired, but with a calm in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He didn't speak much about what happened. When asked, he only said, "They thought we'd break." We didn't. The galaxy, however, heard the truth. Word spread faster than light, not through radio, but through the whispers of other species who had watched from the dark. The Varelians had long claimed to be peacekeepers, guiding young civilizations toward order. But now their story didn't hold. How could they speak of harmony when a single planet of soft-skinned, short-lived beings had sent them running with nothing but confusion and silence? On distant worlds under alien suns, beings who had lived under Varelian rule for generations began to question. If Earth could resist, why couldn't they? Small rebellions sparked in mining colonies. Data leaks appeared in trade networks. Old songs of freedom, long banned, were sung again in hidden rooms. The Varelians tried to control the story. They declared Earth non-viable for integration and placed it under a quarantine zone, no ship allowed within 5 light years. But the damage was done. Their image as calm, wise guides had cracked, and once cracked, it could not be glued back together. Back on Earth, life went on. Cities rebuilt what little had been disrupted. Power grids ran smarter, quieter. Children learned new drills, not for bombs, but for signal silence, for hiding in plain sight. Schools added classes on critical thinking, on reading between lines, on knowing when a gift is really a trap. One evening, weeks after the last Varelian ship vanished, Frank Hayes sat at a small diner outside Albuquerque. The place was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly on the roof. Across from him sat Nina, Ray, and Kyle. No uniforms, no titles. Just 4 people who had seen the edge of something terrible and stepped back. They didn't talk about war. They talked about fishing, about broken cars, about a new coffee shop that made terrible espresso. But beneath the small talk, they all knew the same thing. It wasn't over. It would never really be over. The universe was too big and humanity too loud for silence to last. Frank stirred his coffee. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "Maybe," Kyle replied. "But next time they won't come alone. Others will watch. Others will learn," Nina nodded. "And maybe some of them will reach out, not to test us, but to ask how we did it." Ray smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then we teach them. Not how to fight, how to think." Outside, the rain stopped. Stars appeared through the clouds, cold, distant, but no longer strangers. Humans had looked into the dark and found enemies. But they had also found something else, their own strength. Earth had never asked for this fight. It had not wanted war, had not sought glory. But when pushed, it had answered not with rage, but with cleverness. Not with noise, but with silence that spoke louder than any weapon. The lesson was simple, and it spread without needing words. Humanity are deadly. Not because they love to kill, but because they refuse to be erased. In orbit, the old Horizon 1 station still floated, empty now, its lights off. But inside a single drone, Ray's first one, still recorded. It sent no signals. It just watched, waiting. On Mars, the sealed outpost sat under red dust, quiet and still, but deep in its walls, a tiny battery ticked, counting seconds, just in case. And on Earth, in towns and cities, in labs and farms and quiet homes, people lived. They laughed. They argued. They built. They remembered. Because they knew now what the stars knew. You can test humanity once, but you do not get a second chance.